In order to help some of you better attack the reading of the poetry here, I've tried to outline a couple of these strategies that I offer to students, especially in the grade 12 when we're studying poems specifically. First thing I tell them is to read the poem 3 times, or plan on reading the poem 3 times. The first time through, you want to take note of things like the title of the poem and who the poet is, see if that leads you anywhere. Second of all, look at the entire text, not necessarily reading it, just look at its shape and its form as it is on the page. And lastly, when you get through, consider writing down any images, thoughts, or feelings that you immediately have after. Don't have to explain them or anything like that, just take note of that. In looking at Frost's poem Out Out, a couple of things that I would take note of right away. First, you might notice that all the way down the side here, all of these are capitalized, and they're roughly about the same length. There isn't any particularly long lines or any short lines, and so it has a pretty standard structure, and I'll talk about that later. You might also notice the title, Out Out. This is an allusion. Those of you that have read Macbeth might pick up on that allusion, and I'll come back to this later. So the strategy for the first time through is to read the poem through, all the way through, and I'm not going to do that for you, but what I do suggest is always follow the punctuation. You don't follow the line breaks, and you don't stop at line breaks. You want to follow all of the punctuation that's given to you and read it in that regard. So in this case, I would begin this poem with, "The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood." Those 2 lines, read right one from the other, not a pause after each line. If you do pause after every line, it becomes very disconnected. Starting from the 3rd line, "Sweet scented stuff when the breeze drew across it." And from there, those that lifted their eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset far into Vermont. So what I would hope is that by reading it in this manner, it becomes a little clearer rather than breaking at the end of every line. So that's the first time through. We get to the second reading. This time we want to go a little bit more slowly, and I strongly advise printing out or having a digital version of this that you can actually annotate, engage with. Circle words, underline words, highlight things. I strongly recommend using a pencil or pen rather than a highlighter, simply so that you can write down comments or impressions that you have about words, phrases, or even questions, some things that you don't understand or references that you're not quite sure of. And as you go through that second reading, I have here SOAPs. This is a little device that I ask students to consider all these elements of the poem that help us to both discuss it and think about analyzing it. So who's the speaker? Who's the voice that's talking here? Under what circumstances or the occasion are they delivering these lines? Is there an audience? Are they talking just to the reader? Are they talking to someone in particular? Are they addressing a loved one or a beloved? And what is their reason for addressing this individual? Why are they talking? And lastly, can you sum up all of this in one go? So at the end of our second reading, we should have some things down on paper, whether it's on the poem itself or written on notes on the side. And I always advise that the places that you don't understand, the things that you're unclear of or you think that are very strange, that's sometimes the best spot for analysis. So if I'm going through this and I'm going to annotate this poem, one of the things that strikes me in the opening here is the line here that reads, "And from there those that lifted eyes could count." It really seems strange to refer to people as those that lifted eyes. So I wonder about the implications of that particular line. I pick up on numbers and details like, why 5? Is that important? Does that stand out? And obviously here, Vermont becomes important because that offers us a setting. And any research that you did into the life of Robert Frost would tell you that is perhaps significant from his point of view. One of the other things that I might hone in on here, basically because we've been talking about diction earlier, are, for this particular poem, is notice that he's called boy throughout. The subject about this boy, he comes up repeatedly here, and it does happen with great frequency. And so obviously what is being emphasized here is that it is not a young man, it's a boy, and there's a difference there. Going back to connotations, we have the suggestion here that there's a certain innocence, there's a real youth that's involved, and it's the boy that's doing the work. And now I'm back to my third reading, the process here. If you can, read the poem aloud. Poetry has a tradition of being read out loud, and it is about sounds, and it's really important to understand that sometimes poems need to be heard. And this is an example of one of those, and a lot of the diction lends itself to being read out loud. Look for repetition. I've already addressed that with my annotation. The boy has been mentioned repeatedly, and obviously also the image of 5, which I'll talk about in a second, that comes up. And lastly, if we're going to do any research here on the form, that's when I might want to look into any particulars about the type of poem it is and how that helps me to understand it. So when I return to that third reading and I start to hear this out loud, some other things will jump out at me. In the opening again, we have the onomatopoeia of the buzz saw. Buzz sounds like the action it describes. We have the alliteration here and the repetition of the sound of the S. The dust dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. All the emphasis of that S that's happening there. However, there's other parts that have always intrigued me here, and one of the things that happens when the doctor arrives is we have this great homophone that occurs here. At this point in the poem, the little boy, he saw all spoiled, the double entendre of saw. Don't let him cut my hand off, the doctor, when he comes. Don't let him, sis. So. And this great moment where there's a pause, and it turns out that so could also be written so, in the hopes that perhaps it could be sewn back together. If we hear that out loud, rather than see it on the page, we might be able to make that jump. And so, finally, again, reading this out loud, we're following the punctuation, and we can really hear the impact of the ending of this poem. If I pick it up right here, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing, and that ended it. No more to build on there, and they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. And if we follow that punctuation there, we get really a cold response to this boy's death. And again, because it's a boy and we focus on that diction, we can understand that, or not understand, but be left with a really empty feeling that everyone doesn't seem to care so much about this boy's passing. So in all the times I've been teaching this poem, there's one last thing that I'll wrap up here. And I read this online, and I wish I could remember where I picked up the analysis here, and it was from another teacher. But he had pointed out that this 5 comes up, the 5 mountains in the background. And he actually suggested that students draw this out. And it's significant, I think, because the boy loses his hand. There's 5 fingers on the hand. And take a look at how this plays out in the poem. So this teacher asked students to focus in on the description of the 5 mountain ranges and then draw it. And so it's 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset into far into Vermont. And he suggested that it would look something like this. And we've got a red background there coming through. And so it had the appearance of a saw itself. 5 mountain ranges, 5 fingers. Interesting analysis as far as I was concerned. But back to the title again, and just to end on this note, it is out, out. If you look up the allusion from Macbeth, this is the response that Macbeth gives upon hearing his wife's death, Lady Macbeth. He discovers that she's dead, and she's dead, and he has this really cold response of, yes, of course she's dead. And it doesn't seem really to faze him. And it's the same attitude that we're left with at the end of this, that you're just a brief candle and your life is extinguished so quickly and people move on. And so I think it's an appropriate allusion for this text. So to recap, try reading it 3 times, have a different purpose for each reading. And if you would like this note, I can send you the link and you can see the note and save you writing all that down. I hope that helps.